right? What our scholars said specifically. Then I want to move from that to a more relevant discussion about the topic specifically at hand. Excuse me, and then more general points about, I guess you could say, Islamic learning and society and how we are dealing with stuff at the moment in general. Okay, so I hope that's an acceptable or appreciable approach. Okay, so so the story, first of all, that we're going to share from the Seerah, I'm pretty sure most people will have heard of this before. Okay, the famous hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, where the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, let me actually read the part of the hadith out itself. Okay, so Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an, this hadith is from him. So when you read hadith, by the way, it's very different from reading Quran. When you read hadith, you want to try, and it's harder if you don't have experience with much hadith, okay, and you don't have experience with understanding the culture of that time and how people lived, etc., and the way their lives were oriented. But you want to try and put yourself in the shoes of the people who lived there, what it felt like to be hearing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam speak. That's very important, right? When you understand the context in which these hadith were given, this is actually something in advanced hadith studies they talk about. Okay, so in Quran, yes, last week when we talked about the Quran, the verse of the Quran, we said we have to understand the asbab al-nuzul, the reasons for revelation, right? What context was the verse revealed in, and that way we can understand that verse of the Quran much better, right? Same thing goes for hadith. Instead of asbab al-nuzul, they say asbab al-wurud, right? In what context was the hadith mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ? What was the context? What was being discussed? And when you understand that, and this is similar to, like, for example, modern studies of history, right? We want to study the context behind events in the past so we can understand them better. Okay, similarly with intellectual history, which is something I'm more better versed in, right? Intellectual Islamic history, we always want to understand people, their books, their writings, within the context that they lived in, the times that they lived in, the political situation that they lived in, etc., etc. And that way we understand the book better too, okay? I think some people mentioned here they're in sociology or anthropology, right? Right, so that's often talked about in those subjects, right? The whole text and the context and subtext, all those sort of things. Anyways, so the hadith, Umar radiallahu anh, he tells us, he says, بينما نحن عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات يوم إذ طلع علينا رجل شديد بياد الثياب شديد سواد الشعر لا يرى عليه أثر السفر ولا يعرفه منا أحد. So he says, while we were sitting with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, if you've seen images of the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like recreations of how it looked in the past, it was just a single building, okay? There was no roof except for the front. There were date palm fiber leaves basically covering like a thatched roof on top, just where the imam is in the front. It'll cover like the maximum, the front 2 rows. The rest of it is just an open under the sun, so to speak. There's no carpet, there's nothing, right? It's just people. It's just this rectangular building. Can people literally just pray on the ground, right? There's only one door for men and women. There's no divider or anything like that. It's just a bare bones sort of rectangular sort of structure. So in this case, you imagine the Sahaba radiallahu anhum are all sitting around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we're not told whether it's day or night, but most likely it was day because the details he describes. So they're all sitting around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they're doing what they normally do, which is, and I think I mentioned this last week, right? What we don't understand about the seerah is that the majority of the time, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were studying the Quran with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, a lot of the activity that was going on during the seerah was of education. Okay, so yeah, they're in this circle, and suddenly this man walks in. Okay, suddenly, all of a sudden, إِذْ طَلَعَ عَلَيْنَا, right? This man walks in with extremely white clothing, extremely black hair, and you cannot see any evidence of travel on him. Now, back then, to have very clean clothing and hair was something rare, right? Usually that would be if you just wash your clothing, you just took a shower, you took a bath, and you just came fresh out of that, right? That would be the immediate, because back then people didn't shower that much. Water was not as available, right? It's a desert. On top of that, it's dusty if you ever lived in the Arabian world, okay? If you ever lived in the desert environment, you know that every day there's like a new layer of dust on things. So, people, that would have stuck out. Everyone would have noticed him as he came in. And they would have started wondering, who is this person? And Umar radiallahu anh says, لا يرى عليه أثر السفر. We don't know who this person is. We've never seen him before. He has these clean clothes, this clean black hair, and yet at the same time, none of us knows who he is. Why is that strange? Because if we knew who he was, if he's someone who took a bath in Medina and came here from his house, Medina was small back then. We would know who he was. Medina back then, by the way, was as big as, the whole Medina, the masjid right now, and the courtyard. If you add the masjid and the courtyard together, that's how big the masjid was. If you ever take a tour, like right outside one of the gates, they'll show you that that's actually where the Eid Salah used to be. Because the sunnah for the Eid Salah is to go out in the countryside and pray there. Now that's right outside the gate of the courtyard. Okay? So that's how big Medina was. You would know every single person in the town, okay, in the city generally. So he comes in, he's all clean, they have no idea who he is, okay? And it just strikes them as odd. And he says that's why there was no evidence of travel on him. Because travel back then, travel took months, right? So for example, nowadays, I used to drive this route. I don't know, this route only drove a few times. The route between Mecca and Medina is 400 kilometers. Nowadays, it takes like 3 hours, right? Drive at 120 on the highway, takes you about 3-4 hours, other stuff as well, factors included, okay? Back then, the max you could travel was around 24 kilometers a day on camel or walking, okay? So the journey would take you around, how much does it come out to? 4 times 4 is 16 days. Okay, so about more than 2 weeks, that journey would take you. So if you were traveling the whole time, when you finally arrived at your destination, you would be disheveled. You would be a mess, right? And in fact, there's pre-Islamic Arabic poetry talking about how people would literally be in terror during sandstorms, and they suddenly see a fire in the distance, right? Somebody's campfire, and they feel like they've been saved from this great calamity because of just seeing that fire that somebody lit in their home, right? So this is the environment that they lived back then, okay? And that's why this person stuck out so much. So this person came into the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as the hadith says, he put his hands on the thighs of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said, "Ya Muhammadu, akhbirni anil Islam." Oh Muhammad, tell me about Islam. And the hadith goes on, famous hadith, ask about the pillars of Islam, the pillars of Iman, Ihsan, and some of the signs of the last day. I'm not going to talk about any of that here. We're just going to talk about that first part. Okay? Why? Because if you look at other narrations of the same hadith, there are a lot of details in here that need unpacking. Okay? So, quick story about this hadith. Actually, 2 stories, not just this hadith. There was a person I interacted with online, of course. These interactions really only happen online, right? There's a person I interacted with online. He said, I don't need to learn Arabic. If I read all these translations of the hadith books by myself, I will understand everything. I need to know about Islam. And I said, okay, good luck, right? Then there was another case where specifically this hadith, somebody said to me, where is your evidence that etiquettes, there's a specific etiquette or adab as we call it, with learning and teaching and knowledge. Where is your evidence from the Quran and Sunnah for this? And I said, it's this hadith, right? This hadith right here. The hadith we're just talking about right now. And he said, there's nothing in the hadith about adab. I'm like, exactly. If you'd had the adab, you would recognize what scholars have written. There's actually about 14 points of adab you can get from this specific, just this part of the hadith, okay? You can get about 14 points of adab just from this. And you would only know if you check the other versions of this hadith, the other narrations, because there's one by Abu Huraira, there's one by Abu Dhar, I think as well. Okay, they all had different recollections of the same event. That's number one. Number two, if you looked at how scholars broke down the hadith, how they understood it, you would realize there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. Okay, so first of all, the first sort of adab. By adab, we mean like, it's not really, when we say the word adab in Islam, specifically in the context of for example, learning Islam, right? A lot of people mistake adab to mean it's just like manners, right? Our parents, right? Usually Desi parents, they yell at you, like, where's your adab, right? And what they actually are talking about is why you're leaning on the dinner table funny, for example, right? Okay, but that's not the adab we're talking about here. There is one understanding of this adab. Adab is the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created relationships in this universe. Okay? Everything in this universe, everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself is within this as well, it has relationships with each other. Okay? So for example, human beings, there is an adab that human beings are required to have with nature, with animals, plants, and the climate, for example. Okay? That adab, because human beings were created, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put us as khulafa, people to take care of the earth. So that because of that, there's an adab we're supposed to have towards the environment, right? And when we don't fulfill that, we're lacking in adab, right? So there's a way, for example, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إِذَا ذَبَحْتُمْ فَأَحْسِنُوا الذَّبْحَ, that if you do dhabh, if you slaughter an animal for the purpose of eating, then do it in an appropriate way, right? To the point where you should not even let the animals see the instrument you're about to use, right? The mercy you're supposed to have in slaughtering an animal, taking a life. Then similarly, other things, for example, during war, that there's an explicit hadith forbidding us from burning down trees, for example, right? So all these sorts of things, right? They show us that there's some sort of concern for we get this overarching idea that there's some sort of responsibility that human beings are supposed to have towards the earth. Now, it goes a lot deeper. There's an adab, parents and children. Okay, there's an adab that parents are supposed to have towards children. There's an adab that children are supposed to have towards parents, right? Adab also in terms of prophets and other human beings, right? We are supposed to have a certain adab towards prophets. They're supposed to have a certain adab towards us. Scholars of Islam specifically, they have an adab that we're supposed to have towards them. They have an adab where they're supposed to have towards us. Similarly, people of knowledge in general, Islam encourages knowledge, emphasizes knowledge. There's an adab even towards our professors here, for example, we're supposed to have, right? Even, for example, political leaders. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this hadith is in Bukhari in the beginning, when he sent a letter to the Caesar of Rome, okay, Herakl or Heraclius at the time, the letter was addressed ila azim al-Rum, to the great one of Rome, calling him by a title. This is the adab of speaking to a ruler of a great nation, for example, right? So all these things, okay, and then of course there's adab between a husband and a wife. Okay, wife needs to have certain adab towards the husband needs to have adab towards the wife. So everything, and then of course the most important adab, the adab that we're supposed to have towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we don't say it that way, but how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conducts himself towards us with rahmah, for example, and justice. And also for those people who are evil, they are punished, right? So all this shows us that there is adab between all of us, right? And it differs. Everything has its specific place. And this is why this is adab. This is how some scholars described adab, of a specific way of thinking, okay? And other people said, when they talked about hikmah in Islam, okay, hikmah, wisdom, is something that, as far as I know in philosophy, okay, epistemology, it's a new subject. They've already recently begun talking about this. Most epistemology is about knowledge, okay, but recently they've begun talking about wisdom. And wisdom, as understood by our ulama, okay, they said hikmah is putting everything in the proper place, right? So hikmah and adab come together. Wisdom and adab come together. If there's no adab, likely there's also wisdom that is missing. And if there's no wisdom, it's going to result in adab that is missing as well, right? Not knowing our correct place. We should all know where our places in this world, where our places in the order of not just the universe, the world. So we should know that we are creation. We have adab towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should know that we are Muslims. We have adab towards the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We are in certain family situations. We have parents, for example. We should have certain adab towards them. We might have, another hadith, for example. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man lam yuqir kabirana wa la yarham saghirana falaysa minna." That whoever does not show respect and waqar, like, it's not just respect. It's more than respect. It's like almost like gravity, right? That you have this gravitas towards elderly people, okay? You have this, it's almost like a sense of servitude towards elder people. You serve them, you have a deep respect for them, okay? And whoever does not have mercy towards the young, then these people are not from us. They're not from the Muslims. But this is such an essential part of Islam that this person, it's as if they're not from us, right? They're not actually kafir or anything, but it's as if they're not from us. It's as if they're not from this ummah. So again, showing that even like society, there's an adab we're supposed to have, okay? So adab, even on campus, for example, okay? Besides the adab towards professors, adab towards non-Muslims is showing them, for example, I'm just giving an example out there, showing them the best side of Islam, for example, teaching them, being concerned about their welfare, not just in the dunya, but also in the akhirah. I'm not sure if this MSA, I'm pretty sure you guys have some dawah booth or something, right? Huh? Yes? Yeah, you do, right? Okay, so like stuff like that, for example, right? That we are concerned about the people around us and we want to do something about it, for example. So this is part of adab as well. So that's adab, okay? And so that's what we're talking about here. Now, specifically in this hadith, it's the adab of a teacher with a student and a student with a teacher. So first of all, what the scholar said, I'm reading from Ibn Hajar al-Haythami's explanation of the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. This is about 500 years old, okay? So first of all, the first point of adab is cleanliness when it comes to knowledge, physical cleanliness, right? Nadafa, that you basically, when you come to gatherings of knowledge, you put on your best clothing. I'm not the best representative of this, okay? You put on your best clothing, okay? You're clean, you come presentable. Okay, Imam Malik radiallahu rahmallah used to come, with his best clothing to recite the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he also used to come with, smelling very well, very nice as well. Okay. Number two, in general, you can get so that's number one, cleanliness specifically when it comes to knowledge. Number two is cleanliness in gatherings in general. Okay. Sometimes when I tell my own students this, the younger ones, right, they're surprised. But for example, it's actually, first of all, the sunnah of brushing your teeth is not the actual, that stick. Okay. That stick everyone calls miswak. That's not miswak only. Miswak is anything you use to brush your teeth. So that includes a regular toothbrush and toothpaste. When we talk about the sunnah of brushing your teeth, it includes brushing your teeth with regular toothbrush, right? So that sunnah, for example, it's also recommended, it's a sunnah to brush your teeth before you enter into gatherings of people. It's sunnah to do that any gathering, whether it be Jummah, the masjid, or any public place, right, where people are going to be in a gathering of knowledge. It's even sunnah to do that when you're going to go home to your family, right? Even more so, actually, it's emphasized more so for a father or a husband when they're going home to their family. They should brush their teeth before they go inside, okay? So all this different rulings, okay, this is emphasis on cleanliness in general in Islam, okay, that people should have before they, first of all, anything to do with knowledge, and also when they go into public gatherings in general, okay? Why should they be clean? Because they should avoid harm, right? When we're unclean, when we smell bad, for example, and we go into public gatherings, we harm other people, right? This is something the Prophet ﷺ actually took very seriously, right? For example, if you ate something that smells bad, technically it's disliked to go to the masjid. Okay, the funny story about this, by the way. I don't know if I told all my old students might. She's the only one here. Okay, my own students might remember this. I'm not sure if I ever mentioned this. So there was once, one summer I stayed back. I was studying in Saudi, okay, studying Islam in Saudi with private teachers and stuff. So one summer I decided to stay back. Worst mistake of my life. Okay. Anyways, I used to come back every summer to Canada. One time I decided to stay. Anyways, I was doing Ramadan there, and I was praying Taraweeh at my local masjid. Now, when you pray at your local masjid, your house is a certain way, okay? So you always end up in the same part of your masjid, okay? And it was a big masjid, so I always ended up on the left side of it. And I remember, like, just standing there in the row. I'm like, who is doing that? You should, astaghfirullah, you're losing your wudu. You should go leave the prayer, right? I literally thought they were passing gas while praying Taraweeh, okay? And A few days later, I think the person was next to me. Okay. And I realized he's not passing gas, he's burping. Okay. And it smelled like death. Okay. And I was like, this person literally, and that's when I reflected back on this ruling that it's disliked to go to the masjid like that. Cause I was like, man, that actually like my eyes were hurting. Like it was disgusting. It was nasty. Okay. So basically, guys, right? So this is an example, right? Just this smallest example that we avoid harm, right, to people. And this is actually a major rule in fiqh, right? La darra wa la dirar, that we avoid harm and harming others whenever possible. So that's two benefits. Number three, oh sorry, there's another one, sorry. Number three, yes, is so in other versions of this narration, there are more details that are missing in this one. Okay, when you look at Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu's version of this hadith, when you look at Abu Dharr's as well, there are some additional details in there. What are those details? When Jibreel alayhi salam first came, he paused in the doorway and he said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Can I come in?" And before he did that, he stopped in the doorway and Jibreel alayhi salam said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, and the gathering, he said, "Assalamu alaikum," right? And everyone said, "Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah." And the Prophet replied specifically, sorry, in the hadith, "Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah." Then he said, "Can I come in?" Right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Yes." And then each step he took, he's like, "Can I come closer?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I come closer?" He said, "Yes." And also in this version of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ was actually sitting on a raised platform. Okay? Apparently there was a raised platform in the masjid specifically for him to teach. Okay? So the Prophet was sitting on that platform, and only then he kept asking permission. Then he came and sat in front of the Prophet ﷺ and put his hands on his thighs, on his legs. Okay, so this shows us additional details. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ, so they said, the scholar said the way the student was sitting, Jibreel alayhi salam, essentially, the Sahaba didn't know who he was originally, right? They found out much later on that it was actually Jibreel that came to them. How much time do we have? Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ, how Jibreel sat next to him was a very humble, submissive way, right? And also very close as well, showing that the relationship between the student and the teacher is actually a very personal one. It's a very different relationship. I've been teaching now for way too long, okay? Been teaching for 13 years, professional educator for 13 years, okay? And one thing I realized throughout my journey is that there is nothing else in the world like a relationship between a teacher and a student. It's a very weird, different relationship. It's almost like you're kind of like someone's father and brother, but also like buddy at the same time. I don't get it, okay? I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but it's a very different relationship. In fact, to the point where if you ever have, this can be a whole topic later on, okay, the issue of true dreams and whatnot, what kind of dreams are true dreams. But if you have a dream, a true dream from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, usually if you see your parents, specifically your father, if you see your father or grandfather in a dream, it usually means your teachers. This is something many scholars have mentioned, okay? Many have experienced as well. So if you see your father or grandfather in a dream, it usually means your teachers. So the way Jibreel alayhi salam came all the way up to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, put his hands on his thighs, okay? This close relationship and also this very humble relationship as well. Okay, shows that the way the student is supposed to sit in front of the teacher as well. Then, what does that say? Oh, so okay. Now another point. So that's the third point. Point number 4 on adab is Jibreel alayhi salam started with a question, and this is very important. That what was the Shifa al-ayy as-su'al. Okay, I'm not sure if that's a hadith. I don't think so. I think it's a saying of scholars. Okay, basically that learning is all about asking questions. Okay, if you're not asking questions, you're not learning, right? Listening to, and this is one of the problems with social media. We listen to stuff, we don't get a chance to ask people questions. Okay, and this is the importance of having, some sort of functional relationship with people who are learned, for example, is that you can actually ask questions, have discussions. That's a very different thing from just listening to somebody talking and walking away, right? So in general, okay, that's very important. and that we understand this point that, how I usually describe it is learning is a conversation. Okay, I'm a teacher, so 90% of my advice is teaching advice, it's learning advice. Okay, just bear with me on that. Okay, that's who I am. The thing is, learning is a conversation. It's not a one-way lecture. Okay, it's a big mistake, to be honest, a lot of teachers make who teach Islam as well, and also a lot of students make as well who are learning Islam, that they expect it to just be delivery and go home. No, it's supposed to be a discussion, right? It's supposed to be a discussion. It's supposed to be a conversation. When I learn, I converse with the teacher, right? So all my studies, just to let you know, I never studied in an institution, Islam specifically. I did my biology degree at McMaster. But the thing is, after that, when I studied Islam abroad for 7 years, all my studies were one-on-one, or like maximum 2 or 3-on-1. So it's very like, I built, like, some of my teachers became my friends, right? Some didn't, our personalities didn't click. But in the end, a lot of our studies were like one-on-one conversation, right? So one thing I really understood from that, and then I teach like classes of 30 or more, for example. Other classes I teach, not just in the school, but outside as well. I teach groups of people, and I try to embody that same spirit because I understand how important it is. I always make time for discussions and Q&A and all this sort of stuff in my classes and conversations and stuff. So that's another point, that questions are an important part of learning. Jibreel alayhi salam came up to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, didn't just sit there waiting for, what he's going to say. No, he asked a question, something he wanted to know, but obviously in this case, he didn't want to know it. He wanted to show the Sahaba, right, that this is how you're supposed to learn. Oh, that's what you guys are looking at. I was like, what's going on behind me? Okay, so that's number 4. Okay, point number 5, and this is there's different types of questions you can ask a teacher. Okay, there's different types of questions. Some are good, some are not so good. Okay, so the good ones, for example, is asking questions to learn. Okay, asking questions to learn. This is something that, like I said, it's a conversation, right? You expect to ask the teacher something, you expect to get something back, and you ask a follow-up question, etc. There's a whole discussion that goes on. It's open-ended. There's really not much structure to it. Another example, though, is you're asking a scholar, let's say you're in a particular situation, okay? This is something as you get older, you're going to understand the importance of, okay? Things like, a legal decision. You're asking for a legal decision for a marriage case, divorce case, or some sort of contract, for example. You want a legal case on something, okay? Asking that kind of question is very different. Whatever the scholar says becomes binding on you, especially in the old days. If it was a judge, right? If the judge is giving you a ruling, it's not a conversation anymore, right? In that case, the scholar has full authority, right? Because they're in an official position, for example, in a court or whatever not. So that's a different type of question as well. Then another type of question you can ask is asking for advice, right? I get this sometimes. People ask me for advice, and so this is a conversation I had with some family members, relatives, a bit further out, okay? They said, Samir, what do you think about organ donation? What's the ruling? I talked for a full 10 minutes, and they're like, yeah, we're just going to do it anyway. They're like, I just highlighted some issues and some conversations scholars have had and stuff and whatnot. Like, yeah, we're just going to do what we were doing before anyway. I'm like, why'd you ask me for advice then? What's the point? If you don't care about what I'm going to say, don't ask me for advice, right? So when you ask people for advice, there's a certain adab that comes with that too, right? Either giving advice as well, right? When you give advice, you're not supposed to bear down the person as if you're like choking them, right? You take my advice, or basically like you're done, right? If you don't take my advice, you're a loser, you're an idiot, all this sort of stuff. Some people do this kind of nonsense, okay? No, advice is advice. If somebody asks you for advice, they can take it or leave it. That's up to them. They've looked for the advice that makes the most sense to them, okay? By the way, as a side note, when you ask for advice, one of the most important things in asking for advice is knowing who to ask, okay? A lot of people look for advice. They usually get it from the wrong people, okay? If you want to ask advice, make sure the person you're asking advice from is actually qualified to give that advice. So for example, again, as you get older, you realize this, relationship, marriage advice, you don't get from people with broken relationships, okay? A lot of people do this though. It's really ridiculous, right? You don't take that advice from people, okay? You might need to take it from a marriage counselor. You might need to take it from somebody who's lived a long time in a good relationship, okay, good marriage. That's the kind of people you get relationship advice from. Okay, same thing, for example, with learning advice. You don't get Islamic learning advice from some random person online who doesn't know their stuff, or some half-baked sheikh who, for example, doesn't know how to read Arabic, okay? That's not a sheikh, that's the false claimant to being a sheikh, right? So all these kinds of issues, okay? You don't get, advice on character from somebody who doesn't exemplify good character, right? So all these sorts of things, okay, are very important. We should always know who to ask advice from. The last type of question is the bad one, is when you go up to somebody, especially somebody who, for example, knows more than you as a teacher, and you're asking questions not to learn, but to argue with the person, even though you don't have the same level of knowledge they do. And imagine your professors, I know you guys all study different things, right? If you went up to your physics professor as a first year, second year student and started arguing with them about how you think the Everett's quantum theory is more authoritative than some other one, okay? When professors just look at you like funny, right? We don't argue with our professor. Who argues with the professors here? Not about Marx. Oh yeah, your department is a bit weird, so I'll give you that one. Okay. All right, but like if you argue in terms of arguing with the professor specifically about a subject that's more fact-based, okay, it doesn't make sense, right? If it's a more opinion-based, that's different, right? Which is a lot of social sciences, but like a lot of fact-based subjects, right? You don't go up to your professor and start arguing with them in your first year about the content, right? Rather, once you get to your fourth year, you have more knowledge. Then you can start, having a discussion with your professor in which you challenge and you've been doing your readings, for example. Okay, I'm not sure who does their readings here, but like you've been doing your readings, and now you come to the professor and say, hey, what you said is different from what's in the book, from the author, right? Then at that stage, you can challenge people. Who think that makes sense? Who thinks that makes sense for professors? Why are you guys scared? Okay, just kidding. Okay, now the amount of people who say this for university, like in university or school, right? I'm not going to fight my professor. But then when it comes to like Islam, people meet actual scholars and they start arguing with them, right? It's really weird. I don't understand why it is. Okay, I don't want to attribute it to like nafs or shaitan or something. But people feel like, Islamic knowledge, the Sharia, is a takhassus, is a specialist, it's specialist knowledge, sorry. Okay, there's a reason why you can get a master's and PhD degree in Islamic knowledge, just like you can in any other subject, because there is a lot to learn. Okay, so that's sorry, I keep speaking to this mic. So that's number 5. Number 6, okay, is the love and the Prophet ﷺ did not tell him to go away, right? He let him put his hands on his thighs, for example, and come close, and he's kept saying, can I come closer, Ya Muhammad? He said, yes, come closer, okay? This shows the love and the attention that a teacher should have towards a student, right? Teachers who do not demonstrate this sort of care, love, and respect even for their students, they should, one thing I tell people a lot, one dua I've been making ever since I studied abroad, while I was studying abroad, and also while when I came back as well, I still make this dua from time to time. I said, oh Allah, grant me the best of students, the best of teachers, and the best of companions. And ever since then, I've looked for the common defining feature in all these people that I've had. I've looked for the common defining feature in my students, in my teachers, in my what was the last one? Companions as well. And I've realized all of them share this common thread, which is they're just good people, like good akhlaq. That's it, okay? Students, in terms of students, you get various types, right? Some are very smart, some are not so much. Some are very into the subject, some are not, okay? They're just there passively for knowledge. Some people pay more attention than others, some people fall asleep in class, right? But what defines all these people, and then my teachers as well, okay, my teachers were varying levels. I had teachers who were very academic, right? They were like walking encyclopedias. I had teachers who were not like that. It was more their presence that taught me more. Companions as well, okay? I have a very specific choice of people I hang around, okay? But the thing I've noticed about all these people, what unites them all is just their good akhlaq. I just seem to gravitate towards people with good akhlaq, even if they're not knowledgeable, I don't care, right? And that's something I realize, when we talk about here, okay, the way a teacher is supposed to be, okay, if a teacher cannot exemplify good akhlaq, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَإِنَّهُ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, he is upon the greatness, exaltedness in character. So a teacher who does not exemplify good character is not someone that we should learn our deen from, to be honest, right? They will be the rare person. I had a teacher who was very academic, very, very knowledgeable, but he was old. He was a bit impatient sometimes. With me, he was always nice because his nephew was my main teacher. Okay, so we used to eat together and stuff. Other people, he would be like gruff with them. Right? When I came in, he's like, "Oh, Samir, come in." Right? Anyways, so I just noticed his demeanor towards other people was not always this. But that's an excuse because again, like I said, he was old, and to be honest, he was fed up with where he was. So that's point number 6. Number 7, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ in the other narrations was sitting on a platform, which shows that the Sahaba revered knowledge and teachers, and especially the Prophet ﷺ, to the point where they built a platform for him so he could be teaching from that. And this shows the status we're supposed to have of knowledge and teachers in Islam. The Quran, the first verse to be revealed in the Quran was Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, right? As a verse to do with knowledge. And again, I talked about the seerah. Most of the seerah was actually learning happening. So knowledge, and then in one battle, for example, they exchanged prisoners of war for people who could teach the community of Medina how to read and write. Okay? One of the later battles in China in the 2nd century Hijri, one of the battles that occurred, we didn't have many battles in the East, right? Like all the way in the East. Actually, Qarakhitai would be. So like in the East, we didn't have that many battles, but one of the early battles with the actual Chinese empire back then, okay, I can't remember which one, the Muslims exchanged prisoners of war for the secrets of making paper. Okay, imagine like, we'll give you your prisoners back if you teach us how to make paper. Okay, and that's how paper spread throughout the Muslim world. Before that, books were written on leather, usually. Okay, and like sometimes you needed to and that was very expensive. Sometimes you needed to slaughter 1,000 goats just to make one book. You need their skins, right? Leather comes from skin. So, and then you of course find some way to get the meat to the poor, for example. So all these things, okay, show us that the reverence for teachers and knowledge that we are supposed to have in this deen. Another point, I guess we could say, I'm not sure what number we're on, I think 8, okay, is that you are allowed, the importance of saying Assalamu alaikum in gatherings, okay? The importance of saying Assalamu alaikum, not just in gatherings, Assalamu alaikum in general. If you lived in a Muslim country for any duration of time and you remember it, you will remember how natural it was to say Assalamu alaikum everywhere, right? And that's one of the things I miss the most about Muslim countries. No matter where you go, Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam, right? And it's just that little thing I miss so much because it really builds, you just immediately feel a connection with the person. The person has wished peace on you, you wish peace on them, khalas, right? And whatever fight you have after, it comes after. But the thing is, the salams are very important to the point where the first thing, there's a hadith on this, the first thing the Prophet ﷺ said in Medina. So imagine, he comes to Medina for the first time. People are gathering all around him. They want to see the Prophet because Medina was already Muslim before the Prophet came. And he comes into somebody's house. They sit down. Everyone's huddled around the Prophet ﷺ. And he said his first words were, Afshu salam wa at'imu ta'am wa sallu bil-layli wa nasu niyam. Afshu salam, spread the salams. At'imu ta'am, feed the poor. Wa sallu bil-layli wa nasu niyam. And pray in the night when everyone is asleep. It wasn't, okay, it's wartime. Okay, it's not like let's get back at them, right? We're ready to go, right? Or it's not like arrange the government, time to make a government, right? No, it was literally the salams, feeding the poor, and praying the night prayer. These were the three and you could say these show us the fundamentals of an Islamic society. Okay, these point to the fundamentals of an Islamic society, what they are built on. Other points on adab. that you could add to this? Okay, I've lost what number one. I think it's 8 or 9. For example, another one you could say is seeking permission from seniors and elders in what we do. So I moved to Canada when I was in grade 10. Okay, I started grade 10 here, John Fraser. Okay, I went to McMaster here and whatnot. One thing I realized when I went back to Saudi to study was okay, there's a lot of problems in those cultures back home. Okay, there's a lot of problems in those cultures back home. I'm not saying they're all squeaky clean and everything. One of the things they have down though in our cultures back home is respect for family and family values and respect for elders. I think that's something, especially in the society, individualism, right? We always think about ourselves. It's very common for young people to just be stuck in their room. I'm talking about myself too, right? I'm not young, but you get the drift, right? Stuck in my room kind of thing, right? But like we're all doing our own stuff. We don't have relationships with family. We don't, and then when we get to elders, we don't have the necessary respect for them. Now, again, I'm not speaking to you only, I'm speaking to myself, right? That we should be calling our parents, especially as you get older, you should be calling your parents every single day, right? Even if, you don't get along that well, right? Still, it's just you want to make sure that you are a good person regardless of what people around you are like. Okay? So, so yeah, seeking permission from seniors and elders and, repeating that seeking of permission, not for the sake of you need more permission, but just to show them respect, right? Sometimes elders like calling parents every single day is nothing to do with, they don't learn anything new about you the next day when you call them. It's more about just showing them you still love them, showing them you still respect them, and it makes a huge difference to them, right? And that's something that's worthy in itself to do. There's another one. Another point, when Jibreel alayhi salam greeted the Prophet sallallahu said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, after he said, Ya Muhammad, akhbirni anil Islam. Oh Muhammad, tell me about Islam. And some scholars said, how is this okay? All right. How is this okay? How can he address the Prophet? Like, of course, it's Jibreel, but he's teaching the Sahaba adab here, right? So how is he using this phrase? Why is he saying Ya Muhammad? Why is he using his first name? He should say Ya Rasulullah. Now, of course, there's different discussions on this, but basically, because he's Jibreel alayhi salam, because also he's an angel, he's allowed to use this sort of language. But also, some scholars said that if a teacher is fine with that, if a teacher is fine with you calling them by their first name, okay, don't call them Sheikh anymore. It's just annoying, right? I tell my students, they call me, should you call you Sheikh Samir? I'm like, no, call me Darth Samir. I prefer that. Okay, I'm a Star Wars nerd, anyways. So yeah, in that case, it's allowed as well. Last point we will talk about. Okay, Jibreel alayhi salam, when he came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was asking him. He said, "Akhbirni anil Islam. Tell me about Islam." He said, "Tell me about Iman." He said, "Tell me about Ihsan." He said, "Tell me about the signs of the last day." Very important to understand this. If Abu Huraira was there, these are the basics of Islam, right? This hadith is used in middle schools even to teach about the basics of Islam. One thing we need to understand from this is if Abu Huraira was there, that means this took place in the last 3 years before the Prophet passed away. Why did the Sahaba need to learn this stuff again? Yeah. I never even thought about that. That's awesome. Yeah, good. They're about to become teachers. That's really good, right? They need to learn the basics again. What else? Sorry? Reminder, good, okay. Just because you're very knowledgeable doesn't mean you can't benefit from a basic reminder. Good. Anything else? Yeah. Good. Okay, you can forget stuff as well. It's also a summary, right? The whole hadith is also a summary of much of Islam, right? All together in one. So it's very useful to hear it all together and see how it fits all together. So, in general, these are just some points I wanted to share about this, okay? as we become more disconnected from teachers and more connected to these things, okay? To be honest, one of the things we lose when we acquire knowledge from teachers, and instead we acquire knowledges from our phones, we acquire knowledge from our phones, from, even, books can have that kind of effect. But when we become disconnected from teachers, we become disconnected from people who we can ask questions to, we end up in a serious problem, which is that we become disconnected from what knowledge actually is, what learning actually is, which is a conversation, okay? A lot of times, I think I drew this on the board. I remember who asked, I'm not sure if he's here. Okay, last week, where somebody asked me to explain the difference between information and knowledge, is connected to that as well, right? We need people who we can ask questions to. Sometimes we watch something, or we listen to something, or we read a book, and we've misunderstood concepts. And we don't realize it until we go to a teacher and the person explains it to us, and then we realize, okay, my understanding was problematic. Now I know how to connect the dots.